Alrighty, and we are live. So sorry about that. We check out the first stream. Link will be in the description, but had some technical difficulties, so now we're back up with this new stream. Over to John to pick up where we left off.
Yeah. So as I recall, the point that you dropped out, and I think we actually continued live for a little bit after that. But just to wrap you in, because you were offline at that point, you were pointing out how young men that grow up without a father figure in the home is essentially like priming them for how the landscape would look like in an element of wartime, something like that. So in an element of wartime, the most successful strategy would be going against what we now consider the ethical standards of our time. You're kind of making a lot of noise there. You might want to mute yourself.
Sorry, I thought I was muted. My bad.
Okay. Okay, so it seemed like that's where you were going in what you were talking about. How yes. So depending upon the environment, where let's say there is a greater amount of females that are unprotected, then that leads to what rapist behavior that can. It's not that it necessarily leads to it, but that at least it's vulnerable to the rapist strategy for a lot of women. So I don't know if it was caught on stream or not, but Natha and I were just discussing how in The Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins lays out how there is in an element of like his discussion of group selection in a way, or gene selection, how in a group where all of the members of that group are altruistic towards each other, that is the most resource beneficial group, or most resource beneficial strategy to take on for that group. Whereas instead, if a selfish individual arrives in that group, then all of a sudden, in reality, the selfish strategy is the most evolutionarily resourceful strategy to take on. Yeah, exactly. Because all the resources would be pulled towards you, and everyone else is just giving away everything, and you're just taking everything, but nothing happens from that. So it's pointing out how the most adaptive strategy is always kind of like fluid and dependent upon the socio-cultural context of the time. So when you're within an altruistic, in an overly altruistic environment where everyone's giving away things, then what's most successful evolutionarily is a selfish strategy. Dawkins was using that as an example to, I guess, argue against group selection. Whereas if selection was taking place for the benefit of the group, then all individuals would develop adaptations of altruism towards their group members, rather than developing selfish behaviors, because selfish behaviors is a strategy that is most evolutionarily successful for the individual, but not for the group that it's a part of. And so
and for the gene.
Yes, for the gene, exactly. Yeah. And so and then from there, that was kind of and from there, I brought up The Evolution of God again from Robert Wright, which we talked a little bit about in our Rape of Nanking video. The central thesis from Robert Wright, or one of his central theses, is from both, I believe, in The Moral Animal, but also The Evolution of God, is that morality is created, or like ethics are created when there is a beneficial resource sharing between differing parties that can occur. Whereas if there is no such resource, it's not sharing, but exchange that occurs, then you have no, let's say, like reason to create a shared God or a shared ethic for both parties to have. And what we discussed a little bit about in Rape of Nanking video was how perhaps Japan's isolationism from other countries, just by the mere fact of its location as an island, rather than, say, somewhere like Germany or something like that, where there are multiple other nations surrounding it as well. There's a requirement to cooperate with the neighboring cities that would not have been like the evolution of intergroup morality would not have come to rise for Japan necessarily, because there was no such like exchange between intergroups, at least in a larger city scale. There would still be the smaller tribal interactions that they could develop into a more national or national ethos or ethic or religion that is of the Japanese nation. But because of that, or partially because of that, maybe not directly, there's the distinction between morally considering those that are part of your group and not actually morally considering anybody that's not part of your group. So in the Rape of Nanking, we talked about the Chinese people were seen as reprehensible by the Japanese, and there was no recognition of beneficial interactions that could take place between those two groups, between the Chinese and the Japanese. And so that recognition needs to be taken place in order for there to be cooperation at all. So yeah, in a society where individualism, like as an individual, you can gain everything that you require, and you're not reliant upon any other individual out there for your own existence. This is, I don't know, it's dangerous, I guess, because there's no longer going to be that consideration of others because there's nothing to be gained by morally considering them, essentially. So, but yeah, that's where we all caught up. So,
yeah, sounds good. It sounds like I finished my points and then I kind of got, you guys heard me going, oh, can you hear me? So, yeah, well, yeah, that sounds good. Nothing there I particularly disagree with. It's a little bit annoying because, not you, but just the situation, because I'm on my phone and I've had to leave my laptop behind, so I can't read out the notes as easily. But I think, yeah, so we've kind of talked about the implications of these notions and also their validity. So, like, you know, we've given the arguments of why female selective criteria can increase fitness and the domain in which it would, as well as the domain in which masculine sexual strategy creates fitness, that being through consensual and non-consensual, so rape. But, you know, modern ethic deplores that, whereas we see also in, I'm not sure how widespread it is, but in certain indigenous societies, which are more tribal, they're pre-agricultural, then rape is much more common, especially rape of young, like statutory and forceful rape, which would seem to make sense because there is less. Like it's just like the only competitive factor there when you may take away resources would be sperm and aggression competition, which is who is the most alpha of the people, and they would show that through different aggressive forces, raping also one of them, which would increase the facilitation of their sperm competition. In the book, in the later chapters, they also talked about one of the feminism critiques where they said there was 5 cultures in which rape didn't exist, but then you look into the actual data and it's like, no, it did. And so that was kind of funny, how they just tried to equivocate away the meaning of rape to then support their own theory. So one of the examples of a situation where they say rape doesn't exist involved kidnapping the woman first, seeing if there would be repercussions, then having sex with the woman. So, yeah. Yeah.
So maybe we can get into the feminist critique of this book and also like their reasonings behind why they would be so antagonistic towards this book and the I guess implications behind the conclusions found in this book as well.
Right. All right. So let me, if you guys want to tackle that, let me see if I can find my notes on my phone. Unless I know I posted some notes on the discussion thread for the book, but I did have a note specific to that. So let me see if I can find it. But can someone open up actually, no, I'll do it. You guys can talk while I see if I have my notes.
Okay. Well, I guess just straightforwardly, there's the assumption that because something has been proven, I guess, evolutionarily successful in the past, that it makes it good in some way. So it is an element of the naturalistic fallacy, where because something is, that gives you justification and reason for saying why it ought to be that way. So because rape in the past has had genetic reproductions, and those reproductions existing as inactive, let's say, modules, even though it's kind of like a mechanistic look at evolution. So because these modules exist within the male mind as a possible strategy to take on, that does not mean that because that is there, that this gives justification for men to act out this strategy at all. And really the assumption that because this might be an underlying strategy within men. Wait, where was I going with that? Okay, the assumption being made by the feminists is that all our underlying biological drives within us are inherently good in some way.
Yeah, and perhaps also like that they are unavoidable. Like so they think that it can't be reduced if it's biological, which is like not the case at all.
Yeah.
But,
well, it's one of those things which is, post the world wars, you had 2 competing camps, and one was nature determinism, which led to or justified slavery and genocide. But then you also had nurture determinism, which justified idiocy when it came to economic and ecological management, which was Soviet Russia and North Korea. as well as China and all the other atrocities that wherever communism laid. So there was two competing camps, but most of the focus was driven towards nature determinism in a complete repulsion away from it, where now we see any natural deterministic argument to be you're a Nazi, which is, I don't know, I like, you know, you can understand why they would say that. So I found this note in the book. So page 125, the authors write, hence, rape supposedly occurs in cultures like that of the United States for the following reason. Male sex role socialization requires that males separate the sexual responsiveness from the needs for love, respect, and affection. Males are trained from childhood to separate. Okay, so this is summarizing what the feminists proclaim. Males are trained from childhood to separate sexual desire from caring, respecting, liking, or loving. One of the consequences of this training is that many men regard women as sexual objects rather than full human beings. Male sex role socialization predisposes men to rape. Even if women were physically stronger than men, it is doubtful that there would be many instances of female rape of males. Female sexual socialization encourages females to integrate sex, affection, and love, and to be sensitive to what their partners want. So this is what, that's from a quote from Russell, 1984, or rather a summary of Russell's position. So my note here, which is more contextual with the larger, more dependent on the larger context there. So my note says, well, this explains a lot. Feminists throw out evolution as a predictive force. As such, they must explain its effects via other means. To justify their ideology, which is hedged on a blank slate, the predicate required for the autocratic social engineering to enable feminine lust for managed resources rather than creative resources. So then this requires patriarchy to fill in the gaps. Essentially, the axioms are that evolution applies for all animals but humans. In humans, evolution is swapped for patriarchy, which is less thorough force than evolution. So what I'm positing here is that the reason why if we destroy evolutionary reasons for or causes for these things like sexual attraction or sexual selection strategies, with rape being one of the side effects of the male, then we have to fill in, we need to create a social strategy, a nurture-based strategy, a nurture-determined strategy for explaining those things. So because they've rejected nature-based or nature determinism, they're trying to fill in the gaps ad hoc through patriarchy, which is why, you know, whenever there's an exception of patriarchy, they just add something new to it, where it becomes this all-encompassing force. So the motivation here also we can see in tech companies, which is the female sexual selection criteria is really, so this is where it really comes into play, which is I talked earlier about how if it was only female selective criteria, then, scratch that, if we had monogamous relationships only, then it would require exponential scale, exponential resources, as well as because the population will also grow. So, right?
I see. Okay, so if every single male had and every single female all had children, let's say in approximately 2.5 or something akin to that, then yeah, you would have an exponential growth. Okay, yeah, I wasn't understanding where you were going with that, but now I get the steps in there.
So, you know, you're having 2.5 children, whatever, per family or more, right? Generally, you know, previously there wasn't contraceptive, so you could have even more than that. So the issue, but then as well, you need to keep these males employed. So you need to keep the population employed, which is this focus on job growth. But also the female selective criteria has no place it doesn't seem to adequately factor in the entire realm of scarcity, because what it says is I will just pursue whoever has the most resources and try and require as, to then use those resources. So you see this in terms of their strategy seems to be my scarce resources of eggs means that the male has to deal with material scarce resources to bring me as much abundance as possible to facilitate the scarcity that I bring to the table. So the woman contributes egg scarcity and the male contributes resource scarcity. So for the male, their perception of scarcity is more around eggs. So eggs is their focus, of reproduction is the focus that is outside their control. Whereas for women, it's more the material would be that thing that is outside their control. They have eggs, and therefore they then campaign for men to compete to provide resources.
So we can think about it like what I discussed with the evolution of God. There's an asymmetrical, or maybe not asymmetrical. Oh, there's resources that the masculine is more capable of attaining, such as through material working in the fields, or hunting and finding things like that. Those are the resources.
It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. Working at Google, something like that. These are resources that men are more, let's say, adaptive towards attaining. And women, they have their own resources that men are completely incapable, or not completely, but not that they are more adaptive towards attaining. So those are resources such as childbearing, child rearing, the ability, empathizing, fostering cooperation among contentious people. There's many things that the women have at their disposal, and there's a distinction between the two. So where in order for men to gain the resources from the women, there has to be some sort of mutual cooperation taking place rather than an asymmetric or a parasitic taking from one side or the other without, like, what I think I brought up with Natha, a Piagetian game where all of the constituents are willing to play, and like they're willing to adopt the rules, the ethics that are there that are put into place in order to have this shared or sacrifice of like certain resources that you have. So like let's say like the man sacrifices his ability to like when entering a monogamous relationship, the man sacrifices his ability to keep his resources to himself and instead devote it to a younger, newer model or something like that. The woman, when entering that relationship, also takes on the sacrifice of not agreeing to divorce, at least within our Western society, not agreeing to divorce him for no sufficient reason and taking half of his resources.
Well, that's not sacrifice. Well, they're not divorce is a sacrifice to her, I guess. But
okay, yeah. Her sacrifice.
She sacrifices her the ability for polyamory. So she's saying, I will guarantee that the children I bear will be yours, and I will not commit adultery. Which is why. So this is actually why the book explains that adultery within when a woman commits adultery, this is actually one of the largest causes of violence against women intra-marriage, which is that men then exhibit violence to their adulterous wife or the suspected adulteress to the wife to then destroy the woman's potential child, which is not of his own.
So this was that part in the book really reminded me, like made much more sense of this TV show that I watched called Big Little Lies. I think it's just one season really, but in it, like the main character, the woman, she is in an abusive relationship with her husband, who's always going out of town, and like every time he comes back, he has essentially a violent sexual interaction with his wife there. And it's kind of vague and confusing at whether it's directly rape or just violent sex, because she's a willing participant for part of it. So it's muddy in that area. But the book made me at least get a better understanding of why it is that aggressive behavior would be in that man, if there was the assumption that while he was away for a week, that she is completely open to having sexual encounters with other people besides himself, to the point where he might be, in fact, raising children that are not his biological heirs. Things like that. Of course, in the show, it didn't go directly into that, but it at least made a better understanding for why, in that type of situation where a man is away from his wife for a good deal of time, there would be that uneasiness and aggression that would be displayed towards her. Of course, being absolutely horrible for it to be going on.
Well,
and so, like,
again, it's
what
a
we can do.
battle of what's considered worse, right? Because there's this violence or aggression against a woman that would result in abortion or control, or there's a lifetime of man's resources disappearing to a child that isn't his own. So especially one would then, this is why as well, like adultery or divorce cases, they factor in adultery, because an adulterous wife would receive less potential resources than a honest wife, because there would be respect for that.
So in order to make yes, from the man's perspective, he's being cheated out of his resources by allocating them towards an heir that's not his own, and he'll share no biological relationship with. From his perspective, and that's why, from his perspective, he's justified in his domestic abuse. And then from the female perspective, she has her own perspective as well. And so, like, what we can do in order to create cooperation, we have to make sure that these types of we have to make sure that the resource distribution is not asymmetrical, where the man's not feeling like he's being cheated and the woman doesn't feel like she's being cheated. And so what we in order to avoid what we recognize as domestic abuse and an obviously wrong thing to occur, we have to take these things into account so that this doesn't get promulgated forward. But yeah.
And well, we see this, so the strategies for accomplishing that equity of resource, it's very interesting to say that's equity of resources, which is it's the man's material resources and the female's egg resources, right? And that would be considered, like, the fair trade between those is considered equitable. Like, what a weird concept of equity there. So serial, like, monogamy, so arranged marriage monogamy does incredibly well at ensuring equitable distribution there, because this is one of the most surprising things to me of the book, which is, for a long time, I've wondered why or how pedophilia even exists, right? But then you can draw as many moral theories as you want about this. But the moral theories, again, are starting with the cart, or putting the cart before the horse. Because, first there needs to be some type of reason for that morality to develop in the first place compared to other moralities. So the horse there is actually for pedophilia which was surprising to me. So women, as soon as they enter into menarche, which is they have the first menstruation, which is to say they're now fertile, is when they finally start displaying signs of attractiveness, and Western women enter menarche years earlier than other women. From
What do you
other
mean
cultures.
menarche? I don't think I've heard that term used before.
When they start to menstruate.
Okay.
So like the arc of their life for menstruation begins.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see.
Right. So,
Menopause. That's what I've always heard it as. So.
No, menopause is when you run out of eggs.
Mm-hmm. So what's menarche then?
Menarche is when you start releasing eggs.
Oh, I see. So that's when you become fertile. I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So as soon as a woman becomes fertile, is then when she shows signs of attractiveness. So then it's just like, because I was wondering, like, why can men find, a teenage girls attractive, and why then is the age of consent laws 16 when even at 14 you're attracted to other 14-year-olds, right? It's quite surprising. So the thing is that, and we take arranged marriage, and there's a movie called The Man Who Knew Infinity, which follows mathematician Ramanujan through his travels from India to UK to further mathematics. And in it, the movie did a little dodgy thing, which is they changed the age of his wife. So his wife was who just reached menarche was when she was married. So within arranged marriage cultures, what happens is the woman will reach menarche, then she shows signs of attractiveness, which is reproductive value, the accurate judgment of reproductive value, and in which case then the trade leverage that family has of the girl is now perceivable, in which case then it is then used as leverage to get a man which shows promise in resource acquisition, and in which case the negotiation goes, here is a dowry to guarantee both sides will generally provide some type of some type of, like, generally dowries. I'm trying to think, some plan B in case the plan A didn't make it. So for instance, they will say if the wife wasn't a virgin when I finally encountered her, then I would expect this. And the man would say, if your son turns out to be useless, I would expect this. But what happens is the male they'll marry. However, the wife will continue to live without the husband so the husband and wife will remain separate until the husband has earned the resources required to live with the wife and afford a family. So the trade is made where the woman gets early, like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That is when she is married off to the most viable resource acquirer for her perceived reproductive value. And so there'll be a significant age difference here, like 8 years between the male and the female. In which case, once the male has acquired resources, that could be in 5 or 10 years later, then the woman is now of more safe reproductive ability to then to exercise that reproductive value. So it's young judgment of reproductive value on the girl side with young judgment of reproductive value on the male side. Pair that together with the age difference, and the male is then able to afford the upbringing of the family. So this is, again, cultural facilitation of these biological mechanisms very successfully. However, that's that option, whereas what it seems the modern left is trying to do instead is they say, let's scratch all of that altogether and instead just focus on women gaining access and pooling the resources of multiple men, where we would expect all men to be cucks, where they allow women to have complete free reign sexuality and men kind of become more subservient to the women. So like polyamory, generally the is always a way of upgrading the partner. So, and by upgrading the partner, I mean you swap from one partner to a potentially better partner, whereas monogamy is more about upgrading your existing partner. So you work and develop the process through bonding and experience and life experience to level up each other to facilitate each other's needs better. Whereas polyamory is always, you know, keeping an eye out on a better mate. So that is successful for women who convince their husbands to do an open marriage or whatever, because it now allows the woman to always be leveling up the guy potentially. So she will spend more time with whichever guy which she will get more resources from. Whereas the male ends up losing out because of contraceptives. Because before, polyamory still served the male because he could, you know, sex still meant fertilization. Whereas now the female takes away fertilization, and so the male's getting a raw deal. It's kind of like, you know, you're buying dessert, but it was completely fictionary, or whatever, right? Or you bought food, but it was just junk food. So the male is getting the sex, but without the reproduction, whereas the woman is still getting the resources. So you see this as well on Tinder, which is women just use it to get free meals from rich guys.
All right. So you brought up something, and then I don't think fully finalized it in your. You brought up pedophilia. So
Okay. Yeah, well, that makes sense. So pedophilia can be expressed in two different ways, or conceptualized in two different ways. One is sexual acts with minors. The other is attraction to minors.
I see.
Right?
Okay.
So that attraction to minors makes complete sense when you take into account, 10 years or 8 years of wasted eggs is dangerous because that's eggs that could be utilized. But also, women who are married younger, and it says this in the book, have greater bonds to the partner, are more loyal to them. So when we take into the arranged marriage account, which was an incredibly successful strategy for so long, then that type of distance makes sense, where you arrange the young girl once her reproductive value can be judged for attractiveness, to then pair with the most resourceful men, and that works very well. But because if you didn't have the ability, like if you could only judge the girl by attractiveness when she's 18 or 20, then there would be a more mad dash for men to compete over women very quickly. There wouldn't be this 8-year bonding period, and there wouldn't be these type of guarantees, I guess. And there also would be more ability for promiscuity, perhaps, because the woman would be more independent versus parental control and domination. So that's what they mention as well with arranged marriages in the book, that they're made pretty much possible through patriarchal control over the girl. However, that patriarchal control over the girl resulted in far better arrangements for the girl and outcomes for the girl, because it allowed the father to protect the girl from worse mates and facilitate partnering with high quality mates.
At the cost of female autonomy of the individual.
At the cost of female autonomy, yes.
Yeah.
But we're talking about girls here, like, because once they reach, the age of adulthood or independence, which seems to be why, then the fathers have way less control over that female. So it's mostly about, controlling that female as early as possible until you can't control her anymore, or trying to guide. And that's really what the father's role is, which is to, I actually wrote a tweet yesterday in a separate subject, which is girls, when they play tea parties, which is essentially testing social strategies in imagination, fictional strategies, imagined strategies. Whereas the father who plays the tea party with the girl is there to orientate the girl's tea party, her social engineering, to be aligned with reality, which is to say, you're being a tyrant, this isn't fun, you need to be more understanding of my enjoyment or of my time or of, you know, whatever it is. Or you try and work in some little quips about the economy. We'll be like, hey, how much does that tea cost? Where are you sourcing it from? Things like that, right? Whereas the mother is more just everyone play nice and whatever. So the father kind of enforces some type of paternal judgment and societal judgment in accordance with social status and reality, or external reality, I should say. But we can then see, if we take the fatherly influence not just away from boys, where it's required to facilitate wrestling, which is establishing the boundaries of aggression, then we can also see this through with women, which is if you take away the father's role in facilitating the boundaries of social engineering, then the woman entering adulthood doesn't have, you know, they still have this preference of social engineering, and yet it may not be tamed by restraint to reality, which would then make sense.
And they also have no model for what a healthy relationship is, or also for what the actions of a healthy potential father might look like. So like watching your own parents, you get an understanding of like what a normal relationship is and like how they're supposed to act, and then you use that model in order to pick out your future mate. I think that's actually something partially based in Freud, but also I don't know, there might actually be something to it where it's something to do with like men will usually pick out a woman that has similar features to their mother, but I'm not sure exactly of that. But
well, it's the same thing for women, which is women who have abusive fathers generally pair up with abusive partners as well. Because again, it's the strategies that they know. So like a abusive father for a girl may perceive in the girl's mind that love is also some type of aggression, which can be quite complicated and many years of therapy. So, but yeah, Natha?
Yeah, what you talked about before, was that like a theory or a study?
This is just me. Oh, well, his thing about arranged marriages, about the father's role in arranged marriages produces better outcomes for the child, that was included in the book. Whereas the conjecture about the resource distribution, that was my own, and its morality is my own. However, I think like, you know, that book, like they didn't go into they didn't go into any explanations of why rape could be causing, like why rape, they didn't say why rape exists in the first place besides justifying to say it's like a byproduct of male sexual strategy. They didn't actually ever say that it is a beneficial adaptation in certain proximities. Like they didn't explain why is it like higher in war times or in genocide. Like why does this thing persist through humans? And they did give other examples, which is, well, if we were to completely eliminate rape in one society, then another society completely raped them, then the one that eliminated rape would then become at whims to the more psychopathic thing. And we always see this, which is those who all agree to play by certain rules are then exploited by the person who chooses not to play by those rules. So they kind of alluded to it here and there, but I think what they
in the conclusion chapter, they go over the answers to all of the questions that they kind of raised, like why they think that evolutionary theory answers these types of questions that are out there. So one of them being why is rape more frequent in some situations, such as war, than in others? And then the quick paragraph answer to that was humans, including rapists, like all animals, pay attention to costs and benefits when making decisions. Rape by conquering soldiers is common because the benefits are high, many young women are available, and because the costs are low. The women are vulnerable, the rapists are anonymous, and relatively free from sanctions against rape. Cost-benefit considerations also go part of the way toward explaining why modern societies have relatively high rape rates. In such societies, young women rarely are chaperoned and often encounter social circumstances that make them vulnerable to rape. Moreover, anonymity is more prevalent, and the sanctions against rape are less effective deterrents in modern societies than in traditional human environments, where individuals are more likely to be known to others.
Yeah, well, this is what I mean. Like, it's very hedonistic in terms of it only applies to the individual in the proximity of their immediate surroundings, rather than like, and I just find that too short-sighted to deal with the arguments for this more larger group or tribal selection, which is that, you know, for rape to persist, you could just put it down to this individual selection, where individuals who engage in this behavior are more likely to reproduce and whatnot. But then it's just like, it just seems you could go so much further with that theory when you add into selection, which is that rape during genocide would be, you know, it has that societal fitness aspect to it, because, like, say for Genghis Khan, you know, who makes up like a double-digit percentage of Asian genetics, like that, you know, it completely eliminates social strategy. So again, patriarchy represents the social strategy, right? So you have two competing patriarchies, which is two different social strategies. And previously the women were orientated around social strategy A, whereas you know, they set that up as the judgment of where resources lie. And then Genghis Khan comes in, completely obliterates all the practitioners of that social strategy, and then inseminates all the women with genetics that are more likely to then be disposed to his social strategy instead. And then the new generation will be a mixture of the previous female one as well as the Genghis Khan one. So you would then, again, that genetics, like compared to the male who was eliminated, who would have had less strength, then the biggest warrior would have more strength. So you would be then breeding a lot more strength, which then
kind of like the lion's sexual strategy, where the male lions, when they come in contact with novel females, will commit infanticide against the lion cubs that the female had of other males, and then impregnate the woman, and to the point where the female lion actually becomes like sexually aroused upon having her children or cubs being killed by a male lion, which is just quite the surprising thing. But so yeah.
Yeah, because, well, you can take this, right, which is, imagine Asia if Genghis Khan, like, if the women, like, he just eliminated all the males but didn't rape them, or the women all practiced abortion, right? Like, why didn't all the women just get abortions after Genghis Khan raped them?
There wasn't an available strategy.
Wait, women have been doing abortions for very long times. You know, more risky, but like suicide, for instance, like a Japanese wife would commit suicide because chastity was so highly valued.
But that's not okay. Suicide is not a replicable abortion that can be made. Like generally, abortions would be made. Abortions would be made so that a different mate's seed can be generated into a new creature, into a new person.
Yeah.
Whereas if you act out suicide, then that is kind of making the abortion kind of meaningless, really.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's so I mean the Japanese women did commit suicide. Sorry, not the yeah. So many Japanese women as well as Chinese women, because chastity was so highly valued, committed suicide after rape.
Yeah, like in the rape of Nanking, there was that.
So, but you can take this. So let's say you eliminate all the males, but you practice rape, but you don't fertilize anyone. Let's say Genghis Khan was actually infertile, or whatever it is, right? Then what would happen is next, like Genghis Khan of America, let's call him, I don't know, whatever, Captain Colonial, right? Then Captain Colonial would come in, and then neutralize, those few Genghis Khan people very quickly. But if you conquer entire continents and then you, do the impregnation of stronger genes, then the next generation would also be fierce. So that would then provide societal selection against other societies, which is it's operating the same evolutionary strategies, but just as a societal organism rather than an individual organism.
But do you mean that this society would be like, it would be adaptive to that society for the women to get raped, or like?
Okay, yeah. No, so I'm saying that. So yeah, so in. Yeah, well, I mean, but we can see this. So like, if it turns out in situations where resource acquisition isn't high, so for instance, like women who have grown up in ghettos generally hang around more dodgy men, but even then the men are still drug dealers and whatever. So I guess that, they're working their way up the dodginess in resource acquisition. But the point about rape is, I mean, you can think of it the other way, which is in times of Sparta-like war, if it was the weakest man who then raped all the women and then fertilized them versus the strongest man, then it would then make that society more prone then to being genocided again, because the men are still weak. So they will get eliminated again. Whereas if it was the strongest man who raped everyone, which is then shown by their ability to eliminate all the men and then overpower the women, then the next society would be more difficult to rape and take down. And the rape also serves as a integration of the previous society into the new. So it's a assimilation process, like a genetic assimilation process of a society.
Okay. But do you mean that this is... it has females like behavior facilitated this in some way, or do you mean like it's just incidental?
Like, we see this is it a group level adaptation or a gene level adaptation?
Or an adaptation at all?
Yeah, well, it seems in the book, like they stressed there's two competing different sexual strategies, right? Which is the female sexual strategy directly competes with the male sexual strategy. Because if they didn't compete, then there wouldn't be rape. There wouldn't be, rape in the first place, because they would be able to
always correspond with each other without having a party that loses in the interaction with each other.
Yeah, right. So then what will happen is, so they're kind of counterbalances, right? And we see this even with parenting, which is the more equitable the society, the bigger the gender differences expressed become, which is then the more counterbalancing they actually do to each other. So the more masculine the male generally the more feminine the female, which is interesting. So, can people hear all that background noise?
Yeah, we can hear. All right.
Sorry, it's I had to go to the shopping mall, and people like to be loud. But the yeah, so then what would happen is it's just a counterbalance. So the female sexual strategy is best for stable situations, which would make sense. It's the same strategy that they deploy at home. Create a stable environment for the offspring. Acquire resources to create a stable environment for the offspring. And create harmony within other families. So you try and create a stable family and stable families and value agreement. Whereas the male social strategy is like compete and defense and aggression. So it's like a counterbalance, which is when the female social strategy becomes overwhelms the society, then it created weak men, which would then allow exploitation by more aggressive men. Whereas if the male sexual strategy dominated, so let's say everyone just raped each other for several generations, then resource acquisition would not, so resources wouldn't accumulate because everyone would be competing with each other. And then that wouldn't last. So there's this counterbalance that allows societies to continue to remain fit, but it's very like a quickly adapting thing, because like it's just crazy like how much a genocide causes instant adaptation within a society's population, right? So
Well, it's not really adaptation, but it is a selection process that's going on.
Yeah.
well, no, it's like social adaptation. Like the people now change their entire strategy of how to conduct the day-to-day incredibly quickly, right? So more quickly than schools would accommodate. So if you just like go in and you eliminate all of the Chinese men, well, Chinese would be a bad example, but let's say,
Well, are you using like Genghis Khan example again?
well, yeah, well, you could go, but you could even go just more. You don't even, yeah. So anytime the Genghis Khan one's good, but I mean, there's going to be other examples. So you're going to be able to get the society to subject to the new order of things quicker if you eliminated all opposition through tyranny. And so you eliminate all males from, like, all strong males, because then all the cucks and all the weak, all the eliminated men, the lack of strong men, then subject themselves to the new, stronger way of doing things. Whereas we see this on the opposite from the feminine, which is that there's also a desire for tyranny for agreement, which is this desire for solidarity. So it seems like the male achieves solidarity through aggression, whereas the female achieves solidarity through agreement. So you could either get solidarity within a society by getting everyone to agree, or you can get solidarity from a society by rocking up to everyone with guns and killing everybody and then raping everyone instead. So you think about it in terms of like how much a society changes over 300 years of agreement or social changes, and then you added genocide into the mix where a foreign nation comes in, obliterates everyone, then in 50 years, it's not going to resemble the previous society as much as when that genocide, then, if that genocide comes in. Does that make sense? So the argument here is that there's essentially two different ways to facilitate social cohesion. And one is through agreement, which seems to be slower, and then the other one is through aggression, which seems to be quicker. And females, then we see this in modern days as well, where females control the state to then enforce agreement. So we see this with hate, like the new human rights codes and things like that, and the transgender activism, where it's really this type of, I disagree with you, hey hubby, go and punish that guy, for disagreeing with my needs
Mm.
instead. And you see females call to action for men all the time. So like there's this United Airlines clip where this Asian man is being dragged off the aeroplane for, I can't remember what for, but then there was all these women just screaming, "Ah, somebody do something," right? And it's just like, you could do something, but no. Instead, it's the like that's the neuroticism of females at play, which is vocalize your discontent and then select a male that solves it. So, and you know that's a lot safer because you have scarce resources inside you, whereas the strongest man accumulates scarce resources from outside, so they're more capable with dealing with physical aggression. So you can say like you know, all you men, whoever can, let's see, what's the princess test that they run? Like, you know, all men, perform this test, and I will pick the winner as my husband, right?
Well, that's something that happens in like relationships where if some larger man like makes a derogatory comment about a woman, she'll tell her man about that in order to test whether or not he's actually going to fight on her behalf with that person. So, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like an evolutionary explanation at all. It seems like.
Wait. No, of course it is.
It's like it's a cultural selection mechanism that's put into places.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
yeah. That's yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Well, it's saying in addition, which is to say that the same selection criteria that caused. So we can see this in terms of why don't women just submit to rape, right? Rather than why do they fight? And the argument was actually proposed in the book because the fighting would cause only the strongest men to then reproduce with the woman. Because if you allowed any man to reproduce with a woman, then it allows fertilization by any. Whereas if rape, so you have to look, like the book did a bad job at this, which was, well, it talks about the proximity of everything, but it didn't talk about, well, why so for the proximate causes of when rape is most popular, which is wartime, or when resources are unstable, like in unstable situations, then rape goes up. And it's just like, well, this isn't just some maladaptive byproduct, because we can see that this causes better societal outcomes compared to if it wasn't the case.
So kind of like how in gazelles, where as soon as a lion catches them, they kind of go limp and just kind of accept it rather than fighting against the lion in that instance. This, like, as I guess the antithesis then, because for gazelles, I guess they're too spindly to the point where even those that, like, there was never an instance where they were able to fight their way out of being caught and then reproduce after that, strengthening that strategy within the gazelles, perhaps. Whereas for women, the strategy of fighting against their attacker has proven effective through time, I guess. Yeah. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So so it serves two purposes. So one is the aggression validates the female's commitment to the husband, her defense, right? Which then earns her resources. But if the husband's been slaughtered, then there's no point for the aggression. But if the husband's already been slaughtered, then it means that the guy who slaughtered the husband is already more of a strong male than what the husband was. Right, so they've already done that type of that winning. So that thing has already been.
This might be drawing more strings, drawing more connections than are really there at the moment. I don't know. I don't recall this exact argument taking place in the book, But
yeah, but that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. It didn't take place in the book. They alluded to things that could be easily explained by taking this in. But the book authors completely reject societal selection. They view things only as hedonistic outcomes.
well, it's not hedonist. What do you mean by that?
Like
Like
hedonistic
genetic
would,
selection, right?
yeah,
Like,
but they're only looking at it in terms of what is best immediately for the individual, rather than what is best
well,
through.
multi-level selection is kind of a much more controversial, and I think I don't know what the degree of percentage of evolutionary biologists it is held at by. I know there's a few like Edward Wilson and David Sloan Wilson that hold to it,
Yeah.
but I think the maybe not really consensus, but the more favorable approach to looking at evolutionary biology is through the kind of selfish gene lineage selection,
Because like that's the thing, which is these
like
authors,
Weinstein.
yeah, these authors' perspective would have absolutely no explanation within the interpretive framework for suicide, because suicide does not serve the individual in any way. It only serves those around the individual.
But is it really the individual? It seems like it's more like the gene. So if you commit suicide, then it could benefit your relatives.
Yeah, like the honeybee example. So
Sure.
that's
And
an
I think they
insane.
would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Dawkins.
But that's the thing, which is it's against individual things, right? So, because again, you're sacrificing the individual for, you could call it gene or you can call it group, right? Or a group of genes, right? But then the same situation would occur with the fitness argument towards rape in unstable situations, which is that it's the death of the previous weaker husband and then the insemination by the stronger warrior would then cause the weaker genes to then be eliminated. So then the females or their daughters, for instance, would then get implanting of the stronger genes.
The more aggressive genes, yeah. Or and also the more resilient towards aggressive genes. So like, yeah. All right.
But
do we want to go over because like I have to leave in probably 30 minutes or so. But I think it would be good to go over, I guess, the main, social scientist perspective on what rape actually is, because there's the definition of rape that's used by Palmer and Thornhill is not the same definition as is used by most feminists and social scientists, where rape is more a act of violence. That is how it is described as, rather than an act of sexual coercion. Like,
all right.
I guess placing the intentionality behind the act in the aggressive nature of it towards the victim, rather than in the sexual desire-driven assumption made by the authors Thornhill and Palmer.
Right. Okay. I'm not done on my little thing.
All right. Let's get into your group selection argument.
After the Tinder thing, right? So where they talked about that. So the next quote I highlighted was from the book directly. Pre-mating resistance on the part of a female may indirectly access male heritable quality by testing the would-be rapist's strength, endurance, and vigor. Now, again, we heard earlier that the environmental cues that unlock rapey behavior in men is a lack of fatherly restraint, which is generally that the father is doing the spray and pray sexual adaptation tactic, or they're doing which is the inverse of monogamy. It's the polyamorous tactic, which is spray pray and spray everywhere, so it fertilizes many without resource commitment. Whereas and this also correlates with penis size. So men with larger penises generally tend to be more polyamorous and more aggressive, whereas men with smaller penis sizes tend to be more monogamous and have more monogamous cultures. And that would make sense as well, because in more monogamous, there's less sperm to sperm competition. And there's less vaginal competition. So for instance, whereas for the bigger penis, there's more sperm on sperm competition, and female orgasm is more important for copulating that sperm into a fetus. So orgasm plays an important role there. Now, the other aspect here is, so one of those behavioral cues is a lack of father. The other behavioral cue is exposure to vulnerable women. One of the other things was when those things are added, and so or they manifest themselves in, or maybe another environmental cue, as it said earlier, which is Malamuth. So earlier for that, the quote, just to read again, Malamuth and his colleagues is the male's perception of rejection by potential mates and associated history of non-committal heterosexual mateships. Men emerge from this developmental background with a perception of reduced ability to invest in women, an expectation of brief sexual relationships with women, a reduced ability to form enduring relationships, a coercive sexual attitude towards women, and an acceptance of aggression as a tactic for obtaining desired goals. So this is also exactly what Tinder, so Tinder is promoting the behavioral cues that manifest female sexual selection, male sexual selection, which is non-committal relationships, like all the things that just outlined, an inability to invest in women, an expectation of brief relationships with women, a reduced ability to form enduring relationships, and a coercive sexual attitude, and an acceptance of aggression as a tactic for attaining desired goals. Now, the other thing we find is women who are not on the pill around ovulation, they express preference for symmetrical males, which are more aggressive, more domineering males. And then when they're not on the period, they then express preference for more stable beta males. Now, for the pill, it inverses, which is interesting. So the female expresses preference for alphas all the time, and then betas during insemination, which is odd. So, sorry, during ovulation. So we see this with normal strategy.
Wait, when did you say, because if they're on the pill, then they're not ovulating?
No, they are ovulating, but their attractiveness to males inverses. So this is well documented, and it talked about this in the book as well. So the pill, it talked about several side effects of the pill, and one of those.
I thought it was just that they weren't attracted to the masculine features in men, not that it was like.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think so.
Whereas when they're not on the pill,
ovulating.
Yeah, when they are ovulating and they're not on the pill, then they are more attracted to symmetrical features and broad chins, things like that. Whereas when they're on the pill, then they are not actively attracted to those features anymore.
Okay, let me see if I can pull that up. But yeah, either way, I think it's
either way,
the argument with the preference for aggression during ovulation, and then the raising of. So then the majority of time, then it's around the more beta stable male over the aggressive. So we can see this in terms of. Like this explains as well why adultery even exists in the first place among women, and like it's just adding like another strategy there, which is it is advantageous for, and it's not just for the individual. Like okay, it's advantageous from an evolutionary perspective for the female to raise the strongest man's children, especially if their husband failed to protect them from the strongest man. Because then it's saying that so acquire the resources from the beta and produce the alpha. Now, there is the exception of this where the woman does consider, like, the more pair bonded she is to her partner, then the more she will fight the rapist. However, but then we have, the issue of rape fantasies, 50 Shades of Grey, orgasming during non-consensual rape. And they didn't really go into this at all in the book. They touched on it, but they didn't go into any theories of why that would be the case, when it would make sense for that to be the case, because it would explain, because if a woman was able to be raped, then it's showing that the masculine protection against her existing selection of masculine protection was insufficient in protecting her from aggression and valor, which then would require more aggression and valor to defend herself in the future. If that makes sense.
Say the last part again.
So for a woman to be raped, then it would mean that her previous sexual selection was insufficient in protecting her.
Or that her inability to make a sexual selection was inhibiting her in some way as well. So, like, So if a woman is out there sexually provocative, and the reasoning for why she's doing this is because she doesn't yet have any sort of committed relationship with a mate, then, oh gosh, that she doesn't have a protection mechanism for those individuals that are more combative or aggressive, and that are willing to make that cost benefit analysis.
We see this as well, which is women who orgasm during rape, they express high shame, right? And then it goes underreported. But then, everything, like, I've read through the citations of this book and also tried to find any explanation for that, but they all just kind of dismissed it as just the side effect of a byproduct of normal sexual stimulation. But that just seems too inexcusable, because it would be easier to justify, it aligns with the theory that, hold on, I'm getting background noise from someone.
Yeah, that's fine, sorry.
Yeah, so it would be more cohesive to explain it as it is the organism of the female, so a sub-personality, more primal programming in the female, than saying my existing strategy was not sufficient, this is more sufficient for going forward. Because, and again, not all behaviors we adopt are beneficial to the individual unit. Some behaviors we adopt are at sacrifice for the individual unit, for the health of the genetic tribe or the gene.
Or they are,
or the offspring.
They might be accidental byproducts, such as like addiction to masturbation, something like that, that have no benefit for the larger group nor for the genetic lineage.
Yeah. So this is so just like with so that it just seems way more cohesive to explain it as there's two competing forms of fitness, and then they reward fitness in different categories, which is the female sexual selection creates fitness in stable situations, and the male sexual selection strategy creates fitness in unstable situations. Or appealing, I should say, to the male selection strategy creates fitness in unstable situations, which would be the thing there.
Yeah, I think you could probably generate some predictions from that theory. Like women who orgasm should do that when the rapist is more like overall attractive, I guess.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't even need like, because again, it's her previous sexual selection was proven insufficient. So her form of attractiveness may not particularly coincide with what is now required. But again, they did do like a lot of argumentation where rape is generally unsustainable in situations, in certain situations. But again, if rape was completely unsustainable, then it would be phased out, I'd imagine.
We've also reached a point where we have a much greater degree of control over our environment than our past ancestors have had. And so things that we see as detrimental towards the group that we coexist within, these such as rape will need to be weeded out through other means rather than through genetic means, which is just takes too long. And also for like there's still people that have, let's say, dormant rapist genes within them that we can still gain utility from keeping alive. So as long as we create social environments in where those dormant genes, those dormant strategies do not occur, then we don't need to go through the process of genetic selection through like the killing of anybody with a specific genotype.
Well, I don't think, well, we're always going to get mutations of behavior in cheating that exploit stable behavior. As soon as stable behavior evolves, then a mutation will evolve to exploit it. And again, that's to further fitness, because a society that quickly revises itself to protect itself against exploitation is a more fit society. Now, in the book, again, they say on page 157, the rape of a man's wife is a threat to the man's reproductive success because it threatens his paternity certainty. Hence, selection favored males who responded to the rape of their wives in certain ways. So we see that men are deploying different strategies for dealing with the rape of a wife. And that could be explained through personality distribution, different cultural forces. But there is different approaches. And one of those is, for instance, we have polyamorous men who let their wives sleep with whoever they want. So I've added the note. This is to say that the experiment has already run its course conclusively with alternative approaches eliminated. This does not seem to be the case, however. Cuckoldry is widespread. It seems there are multiple evolutionary adaptations still at competition here. Another point for the self-gene group selection. Only a page earlier, the author says, not only has it, so in the context of genocide, they have written, not only has it reduced the female's victims' reproductive success, there's also reduced, okay, especially, no, okay, no, that wasn't released in genocide. Okay, here we go. So they've got that most men don't rape is indicative of the potential fruitfulness of this approach. However, again, this is limited because I've added the comment, or that most men do not contain the genetic strategies, or rather contain competing genetic strategies that are less prone to rape. For instance, penis size and its correlation with polygamy, aka spray and pray, sexual selection strategy. So what would be interesting is figuring out what the penis size is of rapists. So find people who were convicted of rape and then evaluate the penis size, because you should be able to then predict that rapists would have a larger penis size because their sexual selection strategy is of less commitment to resources and more commitment to strength and valor over resource acquisition. So it's more the spray and pray mateship strategy.
Yeah, but that information, like when we're out in the world, we're all wearing clothes. So having the information that larger penis size correlates with higher risk of, it's just kind of useless information to go off of, I guess. I don't know.
No, but it would use, it's like a prediction for the theory, because you could, like, so for instance, if you were to say it's about increased fitness, so of the male selection strategy, and that, you know, again, rapists are showing, so, you know, there would be a whole array of questions that could be asked and researched to find out whether there is societal, whether or not it is a matter of fitness of the different strategies. Because they proclaim in a thing fitness for the female sexual selection strategy, but they don't go far enough to even posit the male fitness, the fitness of the male sexual selection strategy. So, but you know, rapists would also be higher on testosterone than non-rapists. This would be a prediction that one can make. And you would also say rapists would be more engaged in sperm-on-sperm competition with other mates. Therefore, you would hypothesize that their ejaculation would be bigger. You would hypothesize that their penis is probably larger as well. You would then also hypothesize that they are probably going to be more, and you could probably say whether or not the female, you could look like there's ways where this would coincide with like the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon, as well as the female preference for importing refugees into Europe. Like you could tie those things in. Like I don't understand.
It's quite the yeah, it's quite the endeavor you have there. I don't know. I'm not seeing the practical utility to any of that, really.
Wait. But the practical, so this is the difference between you rating it 3 out of 5 stars for the book and me rating it 5 out of 5. Because if you extrapolate these things to the social level, then it allows you to do, you know, through these predictions, or, you know, through those strategies, again, you can say that, okay, if you don't want a society to collapse to females preferring resource acquisition, so you could then say, okay, if the female sexual strategy is left untamed, it will cause a society to overpopulate and cause a reduction of resources. And then, or it would cause all the women to gravitate towards the most valuable men and then pull their resources. Either way, that would seem to propagate rape among the men, because more men have less access to the women, which could cause more societal infighting, because it reestablishes male on male competition. And then it's just like a cycle, which is you go from super stability, that super stability cucks out most men, rewards the strong men, that then causes instability again. And then you have more desire for strength and valor over pure of non, because, and again, this would make sense because we see this, which is when a male population gets disenfranchised, they become aggressive. And like, it doesn't matter how smart you are or how bourgeoisie you are, if the majority of men are disenfranchised, they're going to overpower you and kill you anyway, unless you have defenses against that. So it's just like, you know, if men don't want, like, if we don't want women to get raped, then it's up to then the males to then be strong enough to protect the women from rape.
Yeah.
Right?
Or as well as building up a strong enough society to ensure that rape cannot occur. Yeah.
And so they don't import people who have been grown up with those activated biological cues, activated environmental cues. Like it's just insane to then import 1 million people which don't have stable fatherhood, which have vulnerable males, vulnerable females, and then so their biological cues are activated for this. Like, it's no surprise why rape is higher in refugees, and why it would also be imported in a stable situation.
Okay, so as I understand it, the import of refugees is largely due from cultural guilt that is held by the people. So the inadvertent causation or outcomes from acting out that guilt by bringing in those. Yeah.
But the collective guilt is just looking at from a social level rather than a biological level. So biologically, what is happening is there is stability that has occurred, right? So recently, female selection has, you know, ensured stability, and then it grows stale, and then as well the economical reasons for the importation of the refugees is because they're not having children. The native populations aren't having children, so you require importing people to then provide for jobs, right? So the society, through optimizing stability, grew stale, and then that's causing instability again. And then there are, but then, you know, they could import people from other nations as well, but for some reason they're specifically choosing Islam, which is so strange because they could pick a whole array of other countries that they could have collective guilt over.
Yeah, I don't know. What I see as being off is there's a placing of choice, or it's like trying to assume sexual selective choices being made on a societal level rather than on an individual level. So I think that people in positions of power likely aren't going to be making choices on behalf of the sexual drives of their constituents, just because that information isn't like known to those in positions of power. There's no like feedback, or I guess feedback mechanism from, let's say you were correct that women were more attracted to aggressive men in their positions of stability. There's no way for that attractive
No, so I didn't say that. I said
make all its way up to the positions of like, okay, there are refugees in this area that we're going to be bringing in. It seems weird to assume the bringing in is directly related to the sexual selection of the constituents of the party of the country.
Well, okay, so maybe the importation is a little bit. Okay, the importation seems to be a side point because, say, in France and Germany, I imagine also in Sweden, there's a high courtship between local women and those refugees that they imported, and then it often at times does involve with rape and aggression and violence and all these bad traits. And then it's just like, well, why are the women choosing to mate with more aggressive men?
Now, why
when
is
they
it?
could
Are
be
you
mating
attributing
with-
choice to that when it's a sexually coerced rape rather than
No.
a?
So they are even mating consensual, like, so they develop relationships with the refugees.
Sure.
And then the refugees are aggressive towards them.
Oh, like after they've already.
Yeah, so they'll be in a relationship for a year or two.
Uh-huh.
And then, or not even a year. And like Paul Joseph Watson's done like series of videos on this, where it's just like the most active proponents for refugees or immigration, or like often at times end up aggressed against by their partners who are refugees, or they end up.
I guess my natural assumption is that they're willing to retain their relationship with abusive figures due to some sense of inherent guilt within them. So like what we were discussing earlier, where women raised with abusive fathers tend to seek out and foster a relationship with abusive husbands. It might be that a sense of cultural white guilt or something like that could influence the staying aspect with abusive foreigners. Just as an alternate theory.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe I need to formulate it all into a written thing,
Yeah.
because I'm not sure I'm convincing anyone. Alright, do you want to read off the next bit? Go into the next bit.
Sure. Like what I was going to go into earlier, the feminist rebuttal to Palmer and Thornhill's work.
Yep.
So yeah, so Palmer and Thornhill kind of use the as a like sexually motivated rather than aggressively motivated, which seems to be the common understanding within the social sciences or the more left-leaning approaches to this topic, where rape is less of an act of sexual motivation or drive, and more so an act of violent aggression. And I think the attribution of aggression towards this behavior may also be resting upon their presumption of the tabula rosa, the blank slate within each individual. There's this quote I pulled up from this Nelson Mandela, which I think is probably highly accepted within the more left-leaning spirit. So no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. It's just so heartwarming to hear this wonderful affirmation of my own intuitions and assumptions. But I doubt it greatly. Yeah, there's the assumption that any aggressive actions partaken by an individual must have been socially indoctrinated into them, rather than a natural response to the circumstances that they face. So it's kind of like why there was so much controversial responses to Ordinary Men, and also towards this book as well, where these types of books are severely attacking the assumption of humans' natural goodness within them that is only ever corrupted through social structures that are incentivizing this type of thing, like learning, like men are taught to be rapists, and their natural inclination is to view women as queens, I guess, and women and people are naturally altruistic towards those of another race, and only through the cultural indoctrination of difference between skin color makes people violent towards each other, or to view them as an other, in fact. And there is much to this, because our cultural layer that does, so we exist within our cultural narrative, and then that is what gives us our that gives us the way that we understand the world. Like that's what gives the value assignments towards how we look at things, whether this action here is a negative action or it's a positive action, because it lends towards positive outcomes for myself and my people, or if I'm under the impression that this lends to negative outcomes for myself and my people. So there's the kind of ongoing discussion now online as to what led to the Christchurch shooting, where the indoctrination through the internet of alt-right figures talking about how Muslims are ruining the cultural are a threat to Western civilization, and how they are out there presented as a rival, a competitive social cultural field that is coming at the cost of Western civilization and what we've held currently that we see as beneficial and good. And so there's these, when these types of declarations and problems are raised and fed into vulnerable individuals that have very little to lose, then they might see this as a call to action for them to live out their story as a hero or something like that, so that they can live out like essentially the honeybee scenario, something like that, where they can act out what they view as being necessary for their tribe to continue. That's at least one possible motivation that can be put in, that is in play. And so because of these types of cultural layer conversations going on, these types of conclusions might be arrived at through the people that are hearing these types of conversations going on, and leading them down towards these types of actions that we see as incredibly horrific, and that we wish to mitigate so that these types of things don't recur. I think I went off on it. Okay, yeah, I was just kind of talking about the difference between the left-leaning understanding of everything is taught and learned, and through that we can change what was taught to us previously and learn instead to do the opposite. Just through the talking about it, we can solve these types of things. But yeah.
Well, they have, I shared a quote on the forum about that, which was that, okay, let me see which one it is. Actually, I'm heading home, so I'll be able to share it by screen share in about like 3 minutes. So if someone wants to riff for 3 minutes,
Yeah,
then
I
I'll read
actually
out what the book says.
have to go soon as well. So I guess just to give you guys a little bit more to go off of while I'm gone.
Well, it's quite late for Natha, so I imagine she would be
Oh,
going.
Yeah,
that's
So,
it's
yeah.
really late.
Okay.
So yeah, and I'm feeling my brain isn't working as
Okay.
as effectively. Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. Let me just jump in. Okay. Our meeting was on Point for Tips. Okay. Okay. So, how does reproductive failure? Okay, reproductive failure would be okay. I'll just read out the things. Social science ideals are vulnerable to cheaters of those ideals, hence the desire for autocracy as a protection against such exploitation. So that's my quote, my summary of this quote from the book. Individuals may form alliances and cooperate, but only when such cooperation is a successful tactic in the competition. Once the basic premise that human psychology and culture are products of selection at the individual level is understood, then the implausibility of the social science view of human nature is revealed simply by asking these questions. What would have been oh my gosh, motorbike man. What would have been the evolutionary fate of individuals in ancestral populations who possessed the nature implied by the social science explanation? How would they have fared in reproductive competition with individuals who had a more specialized set of psychological adaptations? In particular, what would be the evolutionary fate of individuals who engage in the high cost behavior of violence only when they were told to do so by others, including individuals who were the reproductive competitors? Because violent behavior has very high costs, this would have given a tremendous advantage to the competitors, who could simply instruct susceptible rivals to engage in violence when the potential benefits of such competition were low, and to forgo violence when the potential benefits were high. Males who engage in violence with no benefit simply because they were taught to do so must be no one's evolutionary ancestors, because they soon would have been reproduced by males with specialized psychological mechanisms predisposing them to engage in aggression only when the benefits outweighed the costs. Indeed, there is much evidence of the finely tuned design of violent behavior in terms of the costs and benefits of aggression as a solution to very specific problems of the aggressor. Evolutionary biologists have studied aggression intensively across a wide variety of animal species, especially in the last 25 years. A rich empirical base supports the evolutionary view that aggression has evolved as a result of selection, and that therefore aggression is conditionally patterned in relation to predictable ecological factors that affect its benefits and costs. Okay, so the next quote from the book is, reproductive failure also would befall an individual who could be instructed to form cooperative relations with others who intended to exploit his trust and love. Altruism and cooperation can increase reproductive success only when they are directed towards genetic relatives or towards reliable reciprocators. The individual whose psychological systems predisposed him or her to exhibit helpfulness in arbitrary ways, as directed by his culture, would have been most unlikely to out-reproduce competitors. Hence, the individual proposed by social science theory to have such flexible emotions would have become no one's ancestor. An equally unsuccessful fate would await individuals who were sexually aroused only by individuals they were instructed to desire. Sexual attraction and arousal have many non-arbitrary features, including species, sex, age, and health. Males or females in human evolutionary history who mated randomly with regard to any of these characteristics, potential mates, are also no one's evolutionary ancestors. And finally, from the book, the full extent of the role of ideology in determining the acceptance of the social science theory of rape can be seen by considering reactions to a hypothetical explanation based on the very same assumptions about human nature that form the social science theory, but with very different ideological connotations. The implausibility of an infinitely flexible human nature becomes obvious when explanations contrary to one's ideology are proposed. The social science explanation of rape clearly implies that women find rape a negative experience only when they are influenced by their culture to feel this way. If this were true, then stopping rape would not be necessary in order to solve rape as a social problem. Instead, according to the assumptions of the social science explanation of rape, the problem of rape could be solved simply by teaching women that rape is a wonderful experience. If this course of action sounds absurd, and it sounds very absurd to us, then it is because the assumption on which it is based is so implausible. Human females obviously do not have a nature so flexible that they could come to desire the experience of being raped simply by being educated to do so. Yet this is exactly the flexible human nature implied by the social science theory of rape. The ability of ideology to blind people to the utter implausibility of their positions is perhaps the greatest threat to accumulating the knowledge necessary to solve social problems.
Yeah, it's a good reversal in order to kind of point out the flaws with that, the assumption of the all culturally inherited, all assumptions of value are culturally inherited, whereas like if it were so simple as to just teach somebody that, oh, rape is actually not a bad thing at all, it's like, that would be yeah it yeah.
Yeah, so this is where my whole, I don't know, you can call it tinfoil hat or whatever, but I think it seems everyone who proposes these type of arguments are tinfoil hat people until they turn out to be true. So my proposition, which could be false or could be true, would be that if we merge into this group selection, be it group of genes or a group of people, which is just another abstraction group of genes, then we have a lot more explanatory and predictive capability than if we weren't. So I think their reduction or their dismissal of group selection seems to be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because there would be ways to coincide both. And that was also my issue with the first chapter of the book. Many times, so the author's middle third of the book was really good in explaining their theories. However, when they tried to say why their theories are superior to certain other theories, against the social sciences, they were really strong. Against other evolutionary psychologists or evolutionary biologists, then it wasn't as strong, because a lot of the arguments that I found for why they ruled out social selection or group selection was it didn't really add up. Like, they kept trying to say that everything was mutually exclusive when many things could have happened together fine. Or, so they would argue against something and then say, well, this, but they both could coincide in different domains.
All right, I've got to head off,
Yep.
but so bye, the audience and everything like that. Again, if any of you want to discuss this video or parts in this with us, we're open on Twitter. I think Natha had something to say, though. So, all right, bye.
No, I was just saying bye.
Oh, okay.
All right, yeah. Well, yeah, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Natha. Thanks, John. Thanks, Tyler, for joining. Yeah, we have these discussions every week. Next week will be Steven Pinker's Blank Slate book, and then after that, the book Adaptive Minds, which will again provide different interpretations for what we discuss, or different explanations for the topics that we discuss now. So, this book again was more about the individual biological evolutionary take on it, when the other ones actually propose different theories. So maybe maybe after those books, you guys will be more receptive to my arguments from this one. Alrighty.
Well, there's quite a few group selectionists out there, so I don't know, maybe you just need to read some of their books and so you can get a better understanding of like the arguments that they lay forward.
Well,
that way
I'm
you
just trying
can
to understand, like,
support
there's just
yourself.
such blind spots with the individual selectionists. Like they have no compelling argumentation for suicide. Like it just like like
Yeah.
But they have more compelling argumentation for other things. All right, John's gone. All right, so all right, yeah, we can end it there. Thanks again, Natha, so much for joining. Hopefully we can get you on board for the next week's discussion because you've already read the blank slate, but I know you're quite busy. But
yeah, I won't be able to probably, but I will join the week after that because I bought a book, adapting mind something.
Yeah, so that's the whole social science proposition. So it'll be interesting to see. But that book's rated really highly, so we'll see how it does. Alrighty, and yeah, for anyone listening, the links are all in the description. If you think we're wrong on anything, then talk with us and we'll try and learn. Try our best to learn because we don't want to be stupid. Alrighty, thanks everybody. Cheers. All right, I'll stop the broadcast now. Bye.
Yeah, bye.